it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Jamie is a very talented athlete with a really inspiring story, and I won't tell you too much because she's about to share that with you. But I want you guys to give her a warm Jessup welcome because she's come a little bit of a drive to speak to you today. So we're very thankful for having Jamie.
Thank you. I got it. Good morning. I think my drive was longer than my talk will be. I came all the way from Somerset, which is where my family's from. But I'm here to share with you, how God has worked in my life and some amazing things that he's done. So I'm going to talk to you about being powered by faith. When I was a little girl, I accepted Christ as my Savior when I was 6 years old, right on Highway 50. I was driving along, and there was a lot of accidents that day, and my dad wanted to make sure that if anything happened to us, that I was going to go to heaven. And it was from that point on that my dad taught me that my faith needed to be my own, that I couldn't grow up off of his faith or anyone else's, that everything that I did needed to be for God and with God. And so, around that same time, I also knew that my life was going to be filled with sports. We were a sports family, and I loved everything about it. And if I could have, I probably would have played professional football. But the task was to find the sport that I would be good at, the one that I could either go to the Olympics or be a professional, travel around the world. And as I dabbled in various different sports like swimming and running, which earned me a scholarship in college. By the way, I've 20 years this year. I graduated from college. Seems so long ago. With a criminology major. But it was after that that I discovered triathlon and mountain biking, which led me to something called Xterra. And I want to stop for a minute. Can you see the verse? Did it pop up? 1 Corinthians 9:25 says, "Everyone who competes in the games goes into with strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever." And you first have to know that I wanted to be successful in sports not for myself. I wanted to be successful in sports so that I could give glory to God. I had seen so many professional athletes before me say, "I do this for God," but then they would be showboating in the end zone, or they would make it all about themselves. And so I wanted to be the person that stood there and truly glorified God in my sport. So when I found triathlon and mountain biking, there's this thing called Xterra, which is an off-road triathlon. You mountain bike, you swim, and you run consecutively. And in 7 years in that sport, I won more races than any other male or female at that time, which was 37 championship wins, 1 world title, 6 U.S. titles, and 2 European Tour titles. Thank you. And I raced with a sticker that was powered by God and a cross on the top of my bike. My sponsor, Felt, was also a Christian. And I always knew that no matter what point during my race, that if it was hard, I could look down at that cross and know what Jesus did for me. And so I could keep pushing through. And in 2008, life changed for me. It was actually 2007. I was racing at Worlds, and something wasn't right. I had exited the water, heading out onto the mountain bike ride, and I started having pain in my left leg. And it started hurting. And as I kept racing and pushing through, because, that's what we do, we got to get to the finish line, my other leg started hurting really bad because it was working overtime. And I came into transition in 6th place, which wasn't usually where I was. And everybody's looking at me like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "I don't know." And I kept going. And pretty soon, my run was just a shuffle. Somehow, I made it to the finish line in 3rd place that day. But it was after that that my life completely changed. The pain grew. I couldn't run anymore. I kept trying to ride and swim. We were trying to figure out. I was going to hospital after hospital. I was getting misdiagnosis after misdiagnosis, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with me. And it was in 2008 of March when I finally went to UCSF, and they had done a bunch of tests, and they were trying to figure out what was wrong. And one day, while my dad and I were sitting there, because he was living in the hospital with me, because I was completely bedridden, couldn't use my leg at all, couldn't go to the bathroom on my own, and was in utter pain. On a scale of 1 to 10, the doctors always ask you, mine was a 20. So 2 doctors walked in and sat at the end of my bedside. And the one started saying, "If you have to do radiation, And I didn't hear anything after that. And then I heard the other one kind of chime in and say, and if you have to do chemo. And I was fighting back all of the tears as I sat there and let them finish. And when they were done, I looked at them and said, do I have cancer? And they both looked at me wide-eyed, and the radiation doc said, I have an appointment, I have to go. And the chemo doc shook his head, yes. And that's when the floodgates opened, and I began crying and turned to my dad and said, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. And my dad looked at me and said, all you need is a mustard seed of faith. And I said, Dad, what are you talking about? And he said, all you need is a mustard seed of faith, and you can move a mountain, just like in the Bible, Jamie. And I just lost it. And I said, you're right, Dad. And I asked him to bring me a mustard seed the next day because I wanted a reminder. I knew that as I was still planning the rest of my race season, that I was in the fight of my life. I had cancer, and I didn't want to die. I had too much to do. So the next day, my dad showed up with a little box. Now, if you know my dad, he's like the typical guy that usually would go to the grocery store and probably buy one of those in the spice aisle, little mustard seed things. That's what I thought he was going to bring me. And when he handed me this small box, I thought, seriously, Dad, did you pull out like one mustard seed and put it into this box? You could have just given me the jar. And he said, Jamie, just open it. And as I opened it up, it was a necklace, and it was a cross, and inside the cross was a mustard seed. And I don't have it on me right now because the clasp just broke, but I've always worn it since that day. And so I knew I was going to be okay. And in Joshua 1:9 it says, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous, do not be terrified, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. The neat thing about Scripture is it's like an instruction manual. And anytime you're struggling, anytime you're doubting your faith, you can always go to the Bible, and everything in there is going to be there for what you need that day in that moment. Now, the next year was a very hard year for me. When I woke up from a 9.5-hour surgery after losing 16 pints of blood, they had discovered that I'd had a grapefruit-sized tumor growing out of my sciatic nerve, which is why I was in so much pain. What the doctors didn't tell me was that I was never going to run again. I'd probably never ride anything more than a stationary bike, and I'd walk funny for the rest of my life. They wanted to wait and see what I'd be able to do because they had to cut a section of my sciatic nerve out after the surgery in order to remove as much of the cancer as they could. And when I woke up, I think it was about three days I was in the ICU, and a physical therapist came in and said, I'm here to teach you how to walk. And I still didn't understand what was wrong with me. And I said, what are you talking about? I'm a 2004 Xterra World Champion. I've been running for 10 years. What do you mean I need to learn how to walk again? And I sat up as ornery and determined as ever to show this guy that he didn't know what he was talking about. And what I didn't realize was that I couldn't feel my foot, I couldn't wiggle my toes, and I had no use of the lower part of my left leg. And I almost fell over as I got out of bed. And he kind of grabbed me and sat me back down. And it was in that hard dose of reality that I realized I was never going to run again. But I refused to let the doctors tell me I wouldn't be able to bike again. So it took me about a week to figure out how to walk with just a walker. And you can see right there, when I got home and I was discharged out of the hospital, I would walk a half a mile around my dad's neighborhood, and that turned into a mile and then 2 times a day, and I would time myself because the competitive athlete in me does not go away. And in fact, in the hospital when I was learning to walk, the other patients didn't know this, but I would race them every day. And they were a lot of old folks because I was one of the youngest people at only 31 years old to have cancer. Even the guy in chains, there was a prisoner, and I could hear him coming, and I would race them all. They all beat me. But if I had to do it over again, I'd beat them all again. I'd beat them all this time. But 4 days into radiation, so it took about 2 months, I started radiation because I had to heal. 4 days into that radiation, I was called into the doctor's office, and I thought they were there to tell me how well I was doing because I was swimming every day, I was going to the gym, and I'd drive to San Francisco for about 20 minutes of radiation, and I'd drive all the way back home, and I'd go to bed, and I'd do it over again. On that 4th day, all excited, because I wanted to show them how well I was doing, they said, Jamie, we don't know how to tell you this, but your cancer has returned, and it was a lot more aggressive than we originally thought, and it's the size of a grapefruit again. And the thing is, in that moment, God was with me because I was at such peace. I looked at them like, so what does that mean? What do we do? Because I knew I was in far better shape this time around than I was the first time. And he said, well, you're going to have to undergo another surgery. So I finished 26 days of radiation, went into another surgery that took 12 and a half hours. They removed my glute muscle this time, so they had to cut me open from the back and the front, and I had to learn to walk again. And I'd lost the use of the back of my leg now, so the only thing at this time working was now my quad and my knee. And as I started that long battle again, I won't lie to you, I had some very, very dark times. Some times where I could not see the light at the end of the tunnel. But God brought so many people into my life, sending me so many Bible verses and spending time with me, that it gave me that encouragement. And I realized if I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, I needed to be the light for others. And so my journey began, and about 2 weeks after that surgery, I got really, really sick. Ended up back at the hospital with a temperature, I think it ended up getting to about 104, and I passed out. I had no clue what was wrong with me, other than when the doctors came in and were asking me things because I didn't even know really where I was. And they said, you're in sepsis. You almost died. If you had waited one more day, you wouldn't be here. So pretty soon I had drains coming out every end of me, just wanting them out because all I wanted to do was get back on the bike. And I was supposed to start chemo, but I was too sick to start chemo. And how many people do you know can say that? So off I went, starting physical therapy again, starting all over from the sepsis. And one by one, the drains came out. 3 months after that second surgery, I passed my first cancer scan. And I was like, yes. Thank you. And I had one drain left in my back. It was called a nephrostomy drain because my kidney wasn't working. It might be is it my hair? Thank you. Sorry about that, guys. I'm always better with a handheld anyways. So eventually, all the drains came out minus one. And in 2009, doctors had a plan that they were going to have to remove my kidney and stick it into the right pelvic area so that I could get rid of that last drain. And I was pretty excited because I was going to be one step closer to getting back on the bike. I was going to return as a challenged athlete, and I had all these plans. And in June of that year, I went in for that final surgery. The drain came out. It was only a 3-hour surgery, so I was doing really well. Went home after only 7 days in the hospital. Thought life was great. And then I started not feeling well about 3 weeks after that surgery. And I have to tell you, once you've had cancer, not only once, but twice, your brain goes right there. And I just remember praying, please, God, do not let me have cancer again. But if it is, I know that all things are for your purpose, and I will get through this again, and it'll be that much greater of a story. I'm okay with it, God. I can do this with your strength. And it was at this point where I was holding on to my faith, because as we went into the hospital another week, so this is 4 weeks post-surgery, I finally went back to the hospital because we didn't know what was wrong with me. I was there for 13 hours, and they finally called me out into that back room. And the doctor says, Jamie, we know what's wrong with you. And I was there what I thought was to get a CT scan to check the kidney where it was, make sure everything was okay, or to check my stomach area because that's where sarcomas spread. I was prepared for the absolute worst as that doctor looked at me with her doctor straight face. And she said, Jamie, you're pregnant. That's what I said. What? So Romans 8:28 says, and we know that all things work together for good, for them that love God and are called according to his purpose. And I said, no, you need to retest me. There is no way. She retested me and said, you're still pregnant. So I went back to have an ultrasound. My husband at the time was just as surprised and shocked. I went back and had an ultrasound, and the doctor says, oh yeah, everything looks good because we realized I was about 3 days pregnant during that surgery. By the way, you're having twins. See, God has purpose. Had I done chemo, I wouldn't have been able to have kids. So see, he had a plan in me getting sick again and the cancer returning. So Christian and Ryder were born 7.5 weeks early. I had been hospitalized for 7.5 weeks. I think, no, they were only 4.5 weeks early, and I was hospitalized for 7.5 weeks. So I kind of finally threw my hands up in the air and said, all right, God, obviously I want to get back on the bike right now, but it's in your timing. I'm not going to get back on the bike until you're ready to have me be back on the bike. So it took another year of me parenting those two kids. I don't remember much. I showered here and there, ate here and there, mostly took care of them. And when they were about a year old, I had discovered a brace that would allow me to get back on a bike. Because not just being a mom was in the way, but having a brace that was stiff enough to allow my leg to pedal, because I have to clip in, and it has to be so stiff because I can't control my leg at all. We got word of it. I ordered it, and the day that it showed up, I put my race braids in my hair, I had my full kit on, and I was ready to go. And I went for an hour ride that day, and it was like freedom. It was the most excited I had been in the last 3 years. And I just remember praising God for that moment because I knew it was in his timing that I finally did it. Now in Romans 5:3-4 it says, but we also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulations produce perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope. Hope, faith gives us hope. Now, it wasn't too long after I had gotten back on the bike that word had gotten out, and I was getting all kinds of invitations to return to racing. And I tried to explain to all these people that I now have a disability, so I'm not like the superstar Jamie anymore. I can't run. I can only walk. But needless to say, they still kept inviting me. So I went to my first Xterra, and I swam, and I biked the very short course, and I used forearm crutches to get through that 5K walk. And there was not a dry eye out there at the excitement of me returning, because nobody ever thought I was going to return to racing. Now that, in James 1:2-3, it says, consider it pure joy, my brother, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. And it is so true. Faith will make you stronger. So word got out after that, and I ended up getting invited to do paracycling. Paracycling is basically cycling for anybody with a physical disability. So you can be visually impaired, you can be missing a limb, you can have cerebral palsy, in my case, a paralysis, you can be a paraplegic, a quadriplegic. There is a place for you on the paracycling team if you've got a physical disability. So I got invited out to that in 2012, and I won my category, which catapulted me to be part of their national team. Now, the cool thing about that is there's this thing called the Paralympics, which starts 2 weeks after the Olympics, and it is the second largest world sporting event. So I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I'd always wanted to go to the Olympics, and I was like, yes, God, I finally got a door. I'm doing this. So from 2012 all the way up until 2016 when Rio occurred, I competed in 4 events. I trained on the track, which was a velodrome, and there's 2 events there, a sprint event and then a 3K pursuit, and that's a picture of me in the 3K pursuit at Rio. And I also competed on